This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and today we have a Stampede wrestling legend with us. He's wrestled the Los Angeles territory, Japan, all over the place. None other than the inventor of the ladder match, Dan Kroffat. How are you doing today, sir?
Oh, really well. Thank you so much for having me back on your program. I really appreciate it. I know you have a terrific viewing audience, and your program provides for us to talk about so many things. And I think today, I think it's a unique subject, and something that I want to commend you on is that we're going to pay tribute to the fallen, to the people that are no longer with us. And I can't recall the last time I've ever done an interview or seen someone host an interview where we had that opportunity. So good on you for doing this, and thank you for having me.
Yes, unfortunately, in wrestling, a lot of the guys fall early. You've done very well for yourself. I believe you're in your late 70s now, but a lot of your friends have unfortunately passed away from not only Stampede Wrestling, but other territories as well. But one guy that might be good to start off with, since he's synonymous with Stampede Wrestling, is the man that started it himself, Stu Hart, who I know you're very close with. We've had his sons on the channel quite a bit discussing him, but you might be a little bit more impartial.
Well, you know what? I'd like to, since we have the opportunity to talk about Stu, and back to your opening comments, you're right. I now get the label. I'm like one of the last men standing. I have a birthday in 3 weeks or a few weeks, and I turn 77. And I'm grateful to have a career and to be here still. And it saddens me that so many are gone, and so many at a much younger age too. So consequently, I never for a moment, not think about not being here. I appreciate that, and along with that, I'm really grateful that we can open with talking about Stu, because I think your listeners, your viewers, would find it interesting to know more about him. Outside the dungeon, outside his wrestling career, outside his promotional career, that he was a very unique man. And I guess it's privileged for me to speak to him because he did break me in the business in 1969. He was very kind to me. And I think I shared with you previously that Stu never stretched me once in a period of 6-7 weeks before the first show, him breaking me in. He never stretched me. And I was so grateful for that, because I don't think I could have taken a stretching. I'm not a shooter, a tough guy, and never, ever have indicated that I had any of those skills. So for some reason, maybe just out of kindness, he didn't stretch me. But to speak about him personally, I should tell you, yes, they had 12 children, him and Helen. But what made him so unique was his diversity of personality. This was a man who loved pets. He had cats, he had dogs, but he also had taste that was rather unique. I remember being at his home numerous times. We would talk about angles, different things we would do. And he would always point out to me the chandeliers that he had imported from other parts of the world. He had Persian rugs. He loved his dining room suite, solid wood. He had brought that in. He was very eccentric, actually. And the cars he drove, most people were not aware of it, but he loved limousine Cadillacs, not brand new ones, but he'd buy them 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And they were great for hauling wrestlers around. And I think that Stu actually enjoyed having these limousines. They were symbolic of who he was, and the image that he had with it. And funny, with the limousines, I should tell you, I drove his car more than probably anybody else, because he had a characteristic in his personality that was quite unique. Every time we left Calgary for Edmonton, which was about a 3-hour drive north, he would always start out driving, and we'd just get to city limits and he would start nodding off, and the car would drift off and I would reach and grab the wheel. The first couple times this happened, I thought, my God, how has he stayed alive so long, but going to sleep at the wheel so easily. So before you knew it, every time we would drive. After a while, I just got used to it. I'd watch him and I'd see his head nodding, sort of, and he'd be leaning. And I'd say, Stu, would you like me to drive? And of course, I'd say, yeah, that's a hell of an idea. And so, of course, I'd take the wheel and I drove the car. And then he would sit in the passenger side. And for some reason, he'd start chatting about wrestling. So I think that was his little sort of signal that he didn't want to drive all the time. So I got to know him very, very well. And he was a very deep man, very intellectual in so many ways, had a very sharp memory for many people in the industry. He admired wrestlers, real shooters, the tough guys of the world, the George Gordiankos and them. But, you know, the other thing, too, that was interesting was his house. Everybody refers to it as a dungeon, but I was in all levels of that house. And there was some very unique furniture throughout the house. And he had a habit, which was, again, astonishing. When we would work out in the gym, we would then go into the big shower. He had this huge shower room and we'd get all cleaned up. And then he would say, do you like fruit? And I'd say, yeah, I like fruit. Well, what were you? I didn't know what he meant by that. And then he'd walk me to another corner of the room. And here would be about 500 or 600 pounds of fruit, all stacked, bananas, apples, oranges, you name it. It was almost fermenting in this room. And he'd pick out a banana and he'd give me one. And I found out later that every Saturday he would take his Cadillac down to a Safeway at closing time. And he would bring in all the old fruit and put it in his car and take it home. And they would eat it in the house. So, you know, he was so eccentric in so many ways. And another characteristic that he had that a lot of wrestlers would attest to, I'm sure, is that guys would get their paychecks on a Friday night. And I saw a lot of them, I guess the best way to describe it would be jumping up and down and almost protesting their pay. They were not satisfied. And I'd watch Stu take each guy privately and walk them down the hallway into a little area. And 5-10 minutes later, the guy come back with a big smile on his face. And I saw this happen so often. And I finally asked some of the guys, I said, you were quite angry there earlier. And what exactly happened? And they said, oh, Stu, he pointed out that, yes, this check was a little off, but don't worry, we're building some big shows and we're going to make up for this. So he had such a diplomatic way of addressing the personalities of wrestlers. He was a very unique man, and truly miss him. I would tell you that not only was I appreciative of him breaking me into the business, but I had admiration and love for him for what he did for me, and he did for so many other. He was symbolic of wrestling in Western Canada, and I think many of us owe our careers to the fact that he started us. And I don't think I would have went anywhere. I quite frankly, even though I retired with WWE, if Stu had not broke me into the business and given me a chance, I don't think I would have had an opportunity. And of course, you add to that the fan support, and you've got a formula for success. So I'm very grateful. But if you have any questions about Stu, or your listeners do, I'd be happy to address them.
Well, maybe you can clear something up, because a lot of wrestlers like to say that he used the same spatula to pick up cat residue and cat feces as the food. But Diana Hart had told us that he actually did have a spatula for the cat droppings, but it was a separate spatula, and people would exaggerate and mix that up. What was your
and that could be true, because I actually saw him once pick something up. And I would say to you, I cannot positively say that he used the same spatula, but I did see him do that. And that's another characteristic of his personality, I should point out. He loved the kitchen. The Sunday gatherings, he would have all the family there. I always admired that and respect that. I think all of us as individuals and family members, if we can bring our families together for a Sunday gathering every Sunday to meet and talk about things and have family come together, that really, to me, is one of the priorities of life, is to be able to be close to your family. So absolutely true. And he had an amazing kitchen. It was all stainless steel. He had all the best of everything in there, and he loved cooking. Like, I remember once, I can't remember if it was Brad or Ross, but they said he cooked like a 40-pound turkey. Well, that's like a turkey on steroids. And, Stu really enjoyed himself in the kitchen, and he used to always talk to me about these different recipes. And so really, really, he had a great fondness for the kitchen. And the spatula story could go both ways. But I will say he had a great fondness for that cat. I remember, I don't know if I shared this with you once before, but I sat in his living room and he was sitting on the opposing couch, and the cat came up and laid beside him, and he had a coat hanger, and he was stroking the cat's belly, and that cat completely spread out. You could have counted the cat 1, 2, 3. It looked like it was submitting. I mean, you could just tell the cat had a great affection for him, and he did for the cat. But the kitchen story about the spatula, there has to be some truth to that, because I definitely saw him once pick something up, but I cannot say that it was only the same spatula.
Now, as far as a wrestling trainer and as a promoter, since you knew him during his younger days, as opposed to in the 80s when he was starting to slow down,
Yeah.
did he give you any advice that you really took to heart?
Yes, the excellent question. He had a couple of things that he once, when we talked, we traveled for hours in the car, and I remember I was very transparent with him. I said, I'm not a tough guy. I'm not the biggest, best looking guy in the world. I'm open to suggestions. I'm happy to hear anything you can help me with. And one of the things he used to say to me, not once, but on numerous occasions, he would say to me, you get a lot further on grease than you do gravel. And at first, I didn't really know what he meant by that. It didn't, it didn't really strike a chord with me. And then as time went on, I started to note that he was very diplomatic. He was always about a resolution. He never barked at people. I never saw him get angry at anybody. He would listen quietly. And it was like he was always, rather than dwelling on the problem, he would find a solution. And for some reason, his calmness and his intellect, he would travel much further with dealing and managing people than being harsh or dictatorial. So I got the meaning of that. And then he told me another saying too, which was rather interesting. It really proved to be beneficial for me. He used to say to me, if you manage your nickels, your dollars will take care of themselves. And of course, over time, I learned to realize that you have to save your money. You have to make financial planning a part of your life. And as I said numerous times, the wrestling business can be a porthole. It's not a picture window. You have a limited time. Some guys have a very short go in the business. Some guys last for years. But if you look at the percentage of the most successful guys in the business, you're lucky to be in the top 5% of wrestlers who made any money and really made a career of it. So his two philosophies were, don't stir people up, try to get along with everybody. And number two, manage your money. And those stuck with me. I think they influenced me a lot. And there were so many other little wisdoms. I called them pearls. He was always offering little pearls of advice. So if people really got to know him, you would like him very much outside the dungeon.
Some wrestlers have written in books over the years that the sons didn't give Stu as much respect as the folklore says, such as Smith would take kicks at him here and there and things like that. Did you ever notice that the sons didn't give him as much respect as the wrestlers, or is that just wrestlers exaggerating?
Yeah, unfortunately, I've always made a point of not speaking to a subject that I don't have any knowledge of, and I don't. I can only speak to what I observed, what I heard, and I would tell you, I never saw disrespect from any of the boys, and particularly not the girls. That's for sure. And Smith was always an anonymity. He was sort of a unique individual, really. He was a guy who lived in his own world. I liked him very much. He was always kind to me and very generous with his comments, and my family liked him. But he was I guess he was the black sheep of the family, you might say. And even Stu would make reference to Smith periodically, not so much in disappointment. It was always, you never knew what was happening next with Smith, but I don't recall ever one of the boys ever disrespecting Stu. Matter of fact, I think they admired him and they respected him for who he was. And I know he loved his family because we talked about it all the time. That was another one of his pearls. He used to always emphasize to me personally when we drove in the car, he said, a lot of people will come and go in your life, and a lot of wrestlers will be some of those people. But he said, your family's there for you from the start to finish. And it was so true. And, it makes me, and I've learned to be more open and transparent about my failures in life. We can easily talk about our belts, our trophies, our plaques, but I think facing the reality is that each of us in life have things that we wish we would have done differently. And some of us, and myself included, if we could go back in time, spending more time with my family and focusing more on the balancing of wrestling and my careers and my family, I think was critical. And I would hope that any young wrestlers that are watching this, if there's any advice that I could give them or leave with them, is to always remember that your family are there from the start to the finish, but a lot of things in between come and go. So I think Stu was a great family man. I took him out to dinner numerous times, and towards the end of his life, I had the chance to take him and Helen out to dinner in a very nice restaurant, hotel actually in Calgary, and we reminisced about the business and the people that were in it, the ones that are gone and the ones that have succeeded and the ones that have failed. And Stu was very cognizant of all those things.
And of course, Smith passed away a few years ago
Right.
due to cancer. And unfortunately, just a couple months ago, his daughter, Satania was her official name. I forget what it was shortened to, but she passed away really young.
Oh,
So,
I didn't know that.
yes, I'm not exactly sure what happened. I didn't want
Oh,
to get into it with the family members,
yeah.
but unfortunate situation.
Well, from your position, you've interviewed so many people. I mean, you have a real great observation point because you get points of view from so many people. And you and I both have seen people come and go. I think of all the wrestlers I've worked with that are gone: the Archie Goldies, the Tora Kamadas, the Gene Kaniskis, the Harley Race. I mean, I've worked with so many of them. I've had the privilege of working with them, and they were so kind to me to give me the opportunity to rise up in the business and share my ideas and endorse them, and that's very fortunate. But I'm always saddened every time I see Greg Oliver or somebody report somebody's gone. And I often think that we should stop sometimes and just look into the past and take a moment to recognize the people that have come and gone. They've made such great contributions to the business, and I think a lot of your viewers would be interested to know what these people were like outside the ring. And a lot of them were very interesting guys that really had interesting lives. And, it's worth talking about them and giving them credit for who they are.
And of course, Harley Race, I did get to interview him before he passed away, and he's a popular subject on this channel. So I'm sure the fans would like to hear your memories of him.
Right. Harley Race was so kind. I wrestled him for the world title. He was so generous in the ring as a world champion. I worked with several of the world champions. Harley was not only safe to work with, but he was so generous. We'd sit in the dressing room and I'd ask him as a courtesy because I just felt it was appropriate. What do you want to do tonight? And he laid out a match that was always very generous to me, made me look great. And it wasn't my doing, it was his because he was so kind in doing that and very safe, very soft spoken. Each time I saw him at CAC in Las Vegas, we had an opportunity to talk a lot. He was, and he was very generous. He said a couple things to me that really caught me off guard. He thanked me for creating the ladder match as an example, and he said to me, I know you're an idea guy. You brought marketing ideas to the business, and I was quite moved by that because he and I traveled in different circles. We didn't stay in the same territory, so I was pretty impressed that he knew something about my history and he paid a tribute to me personally. So very grateful. But I never heard a person say a bad word about Harley Race. I think he's admired not only by all the people in the business, but I think the fans on a whole admire him too for who he was and what he contributed. This business is really, I've said we have a responsibility to provide the best entertainment for the business for our fans. And I think Harley Race certainly went above and beyond in providing the best entertainment.
Now, I've heard that he liked coming to Calgary just because he would renew his license plates as Canadian plates because he liked to drive at huge speeds in the US and not pay the speeding tickets. Did you ever experience driving with him?
No, I never did, so I can't attest to his driving skills or what his motive was there. But if someone told you that, I'm sure it probably is true. I ran into him in the U.S. and I ran into him here in Canada and in Las Vegas. And like I say, each time really a warm reception. A matter of fact, in one case, I remember Harley was being interviewed by a group of people, and there was a big circle of people around them, and rightfully so. He's such a popular guy. I was standing maybe 100 feet away from another part of the hall in the reception hall, and he turned his head, he saw me, and he broke away and he came right over and he spent 10, 15 minutes. So I was really quite taken by that. It's kind of like living in Hollywood and an Academy Award winner comes over to you and spends time talking to you. So that was really a special moment for me.
Now, there's a fan on here asking about Angelo Mosca, who
Yeah, I know
recently
him well.
passed away after a battle with Alzheimer's, I believe.
Right.
Anything you could share about him? A lot of people, they either liked him or hated him because I guess he could have been a bit of a bully if he didn't
Yes.
like you.
I will speak to Angelo because I knew him very well. Angelo was always kind to me. I had several matches with him. He was a little stiff. He was a bit, I wouldn't say he had the greatest ring psychology. I think he brought a lot of his size and his football passed into the ring. Was he a great worker? I would say no, but he had a unique presence about him. The King Kong look suited him. He and I spent hours and hours playing gin rummy together in the back seat of a car when we traveled across Western Canada. And in the hotel, we'd play cards together. Angelo was, I would say, a very bright guy. He was intelligent. He was very opinionated. He had a strong point of view about just about everything he talked about. I admired him for that. I mean, I had to respect him. I mean, he had a unique career in football, and obviously he went on and had a big career in wrestling. So the promoters obviously saw an opportunity with him. But he was outspoken, and I will suggest that I understand if there's been a difference of opinions about Angelo. So a lot of truth to whatever you've heard.
Yeah, Jake the Snake's brother, Sam Houston, told us about an elaborate rib he played on Angelo one day to get back at him for something. But another guy that you probably are familiar with is Killer Kirk, which a few of the fans have asked about on here.
Yeah, I work with him. I didn't get to know him well, but I work with him. Some of the guys in the business we get to work with, and you do 2 or 3 shows with these guys in different towns, and then you don't see them again. So I remember Killer Kurt, he was a guy I got to know a bit, a big personality, but I can't speak on a personal basis. One guy that maybe your fans would be interested in was Johnny Valentine, the father. I did a tour in Japan with him. I never met a guy in my life. I know Owen Hart was famous for pulling ribs on people, but I think Johnny Valentine, the father, the senior, he lived for pulling jokes on people. He did stuff in the trains when we traveled. He did stuff in the hotels. I remember once he was in a hotel room and he tied his boot to one of the long cords and he swung it to the room below because me and another guy were in the room below and he was trying to break our window, getting us in trouble. You had to watch Johnny Valentine. I mean, he was a guy who had a tremendous reputation in the wrestling business, but he was also a real card. I mean, I remember all those weeks in Japan with him. Every night I check everything I owned to make sure there wasn't a snake or there wasn't something hidden in my clothing because he was very famous for pulling ribs on people.
Another person that passed away, of course, is Owen Hart, who
Right.
you would have known.
I knew
Uh,
him since he was 4 years old.
any
Yeah, a
stories you could
great kid.
share about him?
He was everything that was advertised. He was a great father, a great. I would tell you, he was not only a great dad, but he was also a great husband. He was a guy who loved jokes and had a lot of fun doing it. I mean, he was just, hang on a moment, I just turned my phone off here. Um, Okay, just get that off. There, I got some technical skills. I can turn off a phone. But anyhow, yeah, Owen was a terrific kid. I knew him since he was 4 years old. His dad used to bring him in the ring or into their dressing room. And when he first came in, he was so little and holding Stu's big hands. Stu had hands like a grizzly bear. And Owen would sit there quietly in the chair. And I remember distinctly talking to him. And, he was so shy and withdrawn. And then as the years went on, he grew up. And of course, he ended up marrying Martha, just a terrific lady who's done very well in life, is really honored him with some great fundraising and all kinds of things, doing a great job in the community. Great kids. He's got two children of his own, a boy and a girl. Great kids doing well. But Owen truly was the salt of the earth. He was, I think his dad was really proud of him. And he was a guy who really was a genuine, nice guy. And, the characters they had in the ring for him, I sometimes think when he played a heel, that was hard for him to do because he's just naturally such a really nice guy.
And of course, both of the British Bulldogs have
Oh, so
passed away, and I'm
yeah.
sure you had plenty of interactions with them over the years.
Tons. Like I remember sitting with those guys, both of them. Actually, I had one of Dynamite Kid's first matches in Calgary when he arrived. He might have weighed 170 pounds. Stu booked us that night for 30 minutes to a draw to go through. I will tell you, I probably lost 5, 6 pounds. I was weighing 230 at the time. This guy could move. I knew immediately when at the end of the match, this guy was destined for greatness. He was so polite. I never had a bad incident with Dynamite. I know I've heard tons of stories, but he was always respectful to me. He was always polite all the way through his career. Even when he got big, he got up to like 215 or whatever weight it was. He was always kind to me, even towards the end of their careers. I remember one of my last matches was in the Saddle Dome with 22,000 people here in Calgary, and it was a triple main event, and it was myself and the Honky Tonk Man for the North American belt, and the British Bulldogs were on the card, and we sat and talked for about a half an hour, and they asked me questions about retirement and what to do, and all kinds of good things. Like both of them were really great guys. It was sad and tragic that Dynamite, I know he had run ins with people. I know his personality would fluctuate. I've heard of some horror stories. But on the other side of the coin, I had nothing but great memories with him. I would tell you, pound for pound, honestly, maybe one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. If he had had the skill to manage his money, manage his life, I think he would have become a predominant person that you'd be talking to today. And of course, Davy Boy Smith. I mean, what can you not say about him? A remarkable worker, also a really nice guy. And again, a dressing room, first class. But I know they both ran into problems over the years, and that was very unfortunate. And I would hope they're both remembered for the greatness they brought to the business versus the dark sides of their lives.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I don't even know if Davey made 40. He may have passed away at
Yeah,
39 or 40. So it was
yeah.
pretty sad. And then just the whole situation after all the money he had made. He wasn't doing too well at the time of his death, but his
No.
son seems to be carrying on the legacy well.
Yeah, I don't know his son well, but I've seen him work, and he looks like he really is a good worker. And I can't speak to his personality. I don't know him. It would have been nice to meet him and know him, but we're two different generations. Obviously, I'm from the way back old school, and he's today. So, I watch a lot of the young guys today and admire their skills, and I have fingers crossed for them that some of them may get the big breaks. But unfortunately, the majority of guys they get a chance, but there's no long-term careers for a lot of the guys. I mean, if you're looking at financial planning or career building, unless you get in the WWF or it's pretty hard to really move forward financially or long-term planning.
There's a fan in here asking about John Tenta. I don't know if you ever met him. He was
A
from
big,
Vancouver.
yeah, a big guy, but I don't remember a lot about him. I do. I can't help on that one. No, sorry.
And Tora Kamada,
Oh,
I know you know him well.
I love the guy. Toru Kamada was, it was hard for him to be a bad guy. If you knew him like I did, he loved to cook. Matter of fact, at the end of his career, he moved to Saskatoon, I believe, and he opened up a restaurant. But he was the softest, gentlest, kindest guy. I remember sitting in the dressing room with him, and I used to talk to him. When I created the ladder match, I chose him as my opponent because he sat there and he was a student. He would ask me questions. He said, "What does this ladder match look like, and how long will it go?" And I laid out the whole program, 4, 5, 6 weeks of it. And he sat there with a big smile on his face, and he said, "Whatever it takes, let's do it." He was so accommodating, but he was also just a real kind. If he had fans out there that are listening to your show, if you like Toru Kamada, you had every reason to like him because he was really a nice man. And I was saddened when he passed, as I am with so many of the other guys that are gone now.
And of course, Ed Whalen, who was the voice of Stampede Wrestling, passed
First
away
voice.
quite a while ago now, but I'm sure you were friends with him.
Ed Whalen and I, right from day one, hit it off. Matter of fact, we did fundraising together outside of wrestling, working in the community. He was genuinely a terrific guy, a great husband, a great father, a great community builder. He was admired and respected by all the people at the TV station where he worked. I never met anyone who didn't like Ed Whalen, except maybe Maka Singh, and that was all a performance. But no, great guy. I can't say enough about Whalen. He was also a hockey announcer. He covered the Flames, and he did a terrific job of that. I've been so blessed to have worked with and met so many great people. As I say, I'm saddened. I'm glad to still be here, but in the same breath, I'm saddened that so many of my friends and associates are gone.
Ross Hart was mentioning that Ed Whalen and Bad News Allen didn't get along too well behind the scenes. Did you notice any of that? And of course, Bad News is another one that's gone.
Yeah, I made a policy that when somebody's gone and you may have disagreed with them or not hit it off with them, I don't think it's fair for me to criticize somebody that maybe I didn't have the chemistry with because they're not here to defend themselves. And there might be characteristics about me that people don't like. And, rightfully so, they may want, when I'm gone, maybe they may not say anything too. I don't know. But Bad News Allen had a personality, and I was around him quite a bit. And he and I never got to work because I think Stu recognized that we didn't have chemistry. Bad News Allen was a force, and he was genuinely a tough guy, no question. And if this business was based on tough guys being the superstars, he would have been a superstar. But Bad News Allen had a pretty abrupt personality about him. I saw him in several occasions in the dressing room. He had a really short temper, and I remember one night even I sort of approached him on talking about something, and he had no time to talk to me. So I took the message and realized that there was no way he and I were going to hit it off. But Whalen didn't have much respect for him. He thought there was a real rough edge about Bad News Allen. And I think, Ed, there's just no chemistry there.
Brando wants to know about Ben Basarab, who also passed away untimely. I don't recall exactly what from.
Yeah, I don't know that I didn't even know he passed away. I remember him in the very early years. He was an impressive, good looking young guy. Him and what's his name were tag teams, who was also gone. Oh gosh, he committed suicide. He killed his family.
Chris Benoit.
Yes, Chris Benoit. In the very early years, those two were very impressive young wrestlers. And I thought Basarath was going on to be actually a wrestler, and I'm not sure what happened to him. I think he went off in a different direction to another career. I didn't get to know him well. I didn't know he passed away. I wasn't aware of that because he was a lot younger, I think, than me or close to it. So I'm surprised to hear that.
Yes, I forget exactly what he passed away from, but I guess I'll have to ask Ross. Ross would be more familiar.
Yeah, Ross is he's got, I would call it one of the best memory banks in the business. Ross is, he's a consummate diplomat. I think his mother was another person, Helen Hart. A lot of people never knew her, got to know her. What a wonderful lady. Really, truly diplomatic, a lot of charisma. I remember speaking to her, God, I lost track of times. Always, never short on the phone. She has all the time to talk to you. Very complimentary. Ross, I think, inherited her genes because he is very much that way too. Ross was a consummate gentleman at all time. Ross was really, he represented the business in a very fulfilling way. I think from an information point, you can ask Ross about anybody in the business, and he's got a recall of memory that's quite remarkable, and always kind and generous with compliments. Very nice young man.
And I was just looking it up as you were talking. Ben might not be dead. He might have just dropped off the radar.
Okay.
Someone else is asking about Larry Cameron, who also passed away. He might have been a bit after your time.
Yeah, I didn't know him. Sorry, no.
And Brian Pillman and Chris Benoit, I assume, were after your time as well.
Yeah, I met Pillman. I remember him distinctly. Pillman had a really high energy. He was always bouncing around the dressing room like a very fit guy, good looking guy, well spoken, very likable personality, but he was high energy. I always thought he was like an A type personality. He was on something that was keeping his energy up, and good worker. I mean, I think he was an ex football player, if I'm not mistaken, and actually a very nice guy in the dressing room, and unfortunately died way too young. As you know, another thing too that if you look at this and statistically speaking, and I'm only guessing, but I think wrestlers tend to have the shortest lifespan when you look at how many wrestlers who died in their 40s and 50s and 60s versus any other field of entertainment, whether it be football, hockey, or what have you. I don't know if that's due to steroid use. I don't know about that's mismanagement of health. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I've been cognizant of the fact that it seems like so many people die so young in our business.
Yes, I'm not exactly sure why it is too. Apparently, concussions can also cause
Right,
depression, and that leads people oftentimes to get into other drugs and alcohol,
right.
which can also contribute to an early death. I don't know if you ever met Brick Bronski, who Brian Pillman had a backstage fight with. He went on to be a movie star to a certain extent, but he
What was
also
his
passed away.
What was his name?
Brick Bronski.
No, I never met him. Sorry, no.
Okay. Yeah, he had a brief run in Stampede Wrestling, but he got into some sort of backstage altercation with Pillman, and
Oh, I see.
that was
Okay.
about the end of it.
You
But
know, some of the guys I worked with when I was in Los Angeles, a lot of your viewers would probably know and remember quite well. I remember the Tolis brothers. I got to know them very well, Canadian boys from Hamilton. I was very fortunate to have the belt when I was in Los Angeles, and the Tolis brothers were working there. Freddie Blassie was there at the time. I remember Bruno Sammartino coming through. I mean, Los Angeles at the time I was there was sort of a mecca, if you will, a centerpiece to wrestling. A lot of us went to Japan from there. But I remember the Tolis brothers were very popular guys, very dollar conscious. I remember Chris and John talking to me about they saved their money. It was important. You know, they always spoke about you never know how long you're going to be in the business for. They seemed to be guys who really had their heads together right. Freddie Blassie was an interesting guy in the dressing room. He was flamboyant. He was outgoing. His personality almost matched his ring personality, his persona on television. I had a couple of chats with him. He was on a cane in those days, so he was much older than me. But I had an opportunity to meet many of the greats in the business and work with a lot of them. And as I say, you know, your viewers, listeners, I think it's good that we take the time to talk about some of the wrestlers, and I like to stay in the positive vein. It would be very easy to talk about some wrestlers that I really don't have much respect for the reasons that I think are well founded. But I think this opportunity, us talking here today, we have a chance to talk about some of the greats and let the fans have a little bit of an inside look at who these people were.
Billy Robinson is
Ooh,
another guy that's passed away after he lived a pretty long life. and was doing MMA training with some top fighters right up until he passed. But he had a big run in Stampede wrestling.
He sure did. I'm going to be as kind as I can to Robinson because it speaks to what I just said a few minutes ago about the fact that if you have a negative point of view about somebody, it's, they're long gone and it's not fair. But I can share with you my experience with Billy Robinson. When he first arrived in Calgary, I think he had a chip on his shoulder, or he wanted to prove to everybody how tough he was. I mean, physically tough, that he was a shooter. Everybody knew he was, we'd all heard about his reputation. But of course, Stu had me booked. Actually, not Stu, a guy named Dave Rule, who was the booker at the time, booked me with Billy Robinson about 4 or 5 nights in a row. And each night he took me into the ring, and I knew that all the boys were watching. All the guys were outside the dressing room watching, and it took everything I had to survive with him because he pretty well tied me in knots. And these 20-minute matches were like matches from hell. And short of crawling back to the dressing room, I had enough left in me to walk back. But he really bullied, and in the dressing room he had sort of a dominating personality, if you will. Now, I'd like to think on the bright side, I'd heard that years later when he went to Minnesota or where he went after that, he adapted more to the reality of working with guys, that this is a business and that cooperation will take you a lot further. So maybe I was unfortunate enough to be sort of his test dummy, if you will, to prove to guys that he had all these fancy moves. And as he advanced his career, hopefully he changed his way. But I will tell you that I didn't hold much respect for him because I always felt bullies in the business, most of us, myself included, are not tough guys. We don't come from a background of amateur wrestling, or we're not, I never for 1 minute ever announced to anybody that I had any particular skill beyond pro wrestling. But there was the odd guy who would come along who was bullies, and they would take advantage of guys in the ring. So I never had much respect for guys like that. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of guys who were that way.
And that brings me to Archie the Stomper Goldie. And I guess it's been documented that I think Billy Robinson tried to get rough with him one night. And I guess Archie just rolled out of the rig, grabbed his bag, and left.
And I can absolutely support that because Archie and I talked about that numerous times. Archie Goldie, in my opinion, was one of the greatest assets to the business. I mean, whether he was in Kansas City or wherever he was, I know he gave the fans great value. And I knew him really personally, and he was not a tough guy. In the ring, his persona was invincible. But outside the ring, he was like the rest of us. He was all about business. I think our chemistry worked so well because I used to always talk to him about, this is about box office. Let's give the fans great value. Let's fill the arenas. And we can do that by telling stories. We can build up the interest. We can build up the suspense. Archie was so accommodating. I know that he never liked shooters, guys who were really super tough. It wasn't that. There's nothing wrong with a shooter who gets in the ring and works professionally. But when a guy takes that great skill and uses it to brutalize somebody, I think that's a bit of a coward's route, especially when he's picking on somebody who doesn't have the same skill. But there would be a lot of truth to that. I could see Archie just jumping out of the ring and walking away, because if Robinson would have done some to him what he did to me, I could see Archie just saying, "I'll see you."
Gary Albright is another guy that a fan's bringing up who passed through the Stampede territory. Might have been after your time.
Yeah, I think so.
But yeah, he also passed away young. One guy that I know that you knew was Andre the Giant.
Oh, yeah, great. Great story. I'll share one story about Andre. We'd heard all kinds of tales about him traveling on airplanes where he'd almost have to take up 3 seats. The poor guy. He was in discomfort a lot. I remember I was around him a few times, and he was always trying to be comfortable. It was very difficult for Andre to be comfortable, no matter where we went. It was a restaurant. The chair was never big enough. So this poor guy, he struggled. He was the 7th wonder of the world. People gawked at him all the time. I mean, it's obvious it's going to happen. But I have one story that I'd like to share, and I might have shared this before, I'm not sure. But one night, he and I were in a tag team match where he and I were together in the tag team match as partners. And we had a lot of fun with that. I mean, you can only imagine what our opponents would do with him in the ring. And I had a riot. It was great fun. But that night, we were traveling back from Edmonton, and he and I sat in the back of the limousine. And that night, Stu was up front. Someone else was driving. I can't remember who. But Stu had a habit of pulling into Kentucky Fried Chicken outside of Edmonton as we were always heading home on a 3-hour drive. So that night, Stu said, would anybody like some chicken? And Andre, of course, I love chicken. So he said, how much can you eat? And he said, just give me lots of chicken. So Stu brought a bucket. I'll never forget this. There were 21 pieces in the bucket. And Andre and I are sitting in the back. He's laughing. He's got a 6-pack there with him. Within, I'd say 30 minutes, and I might be 1 or 2 minutes off, he had the whole 21 pieces eaten, and all the bones were flying out the window just as quick. And he was a fun-loving guy, like he really was. But he shared with me numerous times about how uncomfortable travel could be for him. It depended what kind of a car, what kind of it was exhausting for him. I don't think people really realize because they saw him in this great state of this enormous man. And I mean, he was one of the wonders of the world, but, he lived a short life, obviously, because of, the hindrances of life of being so big, but a very nice man, very accommodating. And I think one of the real tributes to him is a movie that his legacy will be forever, is The Princess Bride, where he plays the giant. And I think that's something that if you want to remind yourself about Andre, just go to Netflix or something and pull up The Princess Bride, and you're going to get all the Andre the Giant you want.
And of course, we can't do this podcast without mentioning Jim the Anvil Neidhart, who passed away a couple of years ago.
Right.
And I'm sure you met him quite a few times.
Yeah, I knew Jim. I had a couple of good discussions with him. He, again, always a gentleman. I remember, gosh, I went to a couple of funerals. We went to Owen's funeral. And I mean, Jim, for me, I didn't know Jim well enough to say that I can speak in depth about him, but from the business perspective, he was always a very polite guy in the ring. I never met anybody who didn't like him. I've heard, so it's not for me to really be specific, but I heard he had some habits in life that were led to his downfall. I know he loved his daughter very much, who's become very successful. She's been a great representation to wrestling. I think her dad would have been very proud of her. But he was a nice guy. I think Bret Hart could speak in volumes to Jim about him a lot more characteristically than I can. But I will just say that he was always very nice to me whenever I was around.
Did you get the chance to spend much time with Dean Hart before he passed away?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I knew Dean right from a very young age. A good-looking guy. He had movie star looks. He had all the girls. He had so much charisma. He was like Ross, very much like Ross's personality. Very likable, very, very intelligent. He had this warmth about him, Dean did. But he also had a little bit of a conniving side to him, which I liked, actually. I thought it was cute, a little bit like Smith Hart. He always had something going on. But Dean died far too young, if I'm not mistaken. I think kidney failure. And I think it was in Hawaii. He was kind of like living on the beach or something. I never got the specific details. But I remember his girlfriend, and I've seen her since. All these years later. And Dean was most adorable, lovable guy. He really was. If he was still around today, you would have loved to interview him.
Someone's asking on here if you ever ran into either Edward Carpentier or Dick the Destroyer Buyer.
It's funny. The Destroyer and I in 2011 were in Las Vegas. I received an award down there, and the Destroyer was there, and I talked to him at the poolside. He was on a cane. I'm guessing he was in his early 80s, maybe. I could tell. and I knew of his reputation. We came from 2 generation differences, him and I. He was a superstar in his time, no question about it. He and his wife were there, and I talked to him. I can't say that I got to know him well, but he was very receptive and very friendly. And then I know he passed away a few years after that. And I think, matter of fact, one of the guys from CAC introduced me to him, who just passed away. Karl just passed away, who was sort of a promoter, if you will, of CAC. And I talked to him there, but I didn't know the other guy at all.
Yeah, Karl Lauer, I think was his name. He just passed away last
Yes.
week.
Yeah.
I met him once. I think he was a promoter in LA
Yes.
in the past.
Yeah, he could have been. He was in a different time frame than me. I don't know if he was in Los Angeles, because when I was in Los Angeles, Mike Labelle, Gene Labelle, Charlie Moto, they were running the territory at that time. So I'm not too sure where Karl was, but I think he had a promotion somewhere in the United States.
Of course, Mike Labelle has passed away, and he is one of the legendary promoters who was always known for having a great mind for the business. Any thoughts on him?
No, I didn't get to know him well, believe it or not. It was Charlie Moto that put the belt on me, or it could have been Mike Labelle. Mike never came in the dressing room. I didn't get to know him well for my time in Los Angeles. I got to know Gene Labelle quite well because he was a referee, and he was always in the dressing room and he was chatting it up. They called him Judo Gene Labelle, I believe. And nice guy, very personable. We had a guy named Rich Hughes Dugan was our referee, another really nice guy. I had a great run in Los Angeles. It was tremendous. I was invited to the Merv Griffin show. We went out there. We had a lot of fun in LA. I really liked my time there. Then I went to San Francisco, and I worked up in San Francisco. I got to meet The Rock's dad, and we chatted a lot. I did shows in San Francisco, and then I flew off to Japan and did a tour in Japan. So got to meet a lot of the great guys. Pat Patterson, it was very fortunate. My timing, really, I felt like a kind of a spectator that was allowed to go behind stage with everybody. All these guys were big names at the time.
Barbara would like to know if you ever crossed paths with Gene Kaninsky.
Oh my God. Not only crossed paths with him, I worked with him. Gene and I worked together so many times. I wrestled him for the Pacific Coast Championship. Donnelly of Jonathan, I could go on for hours about him, the Mormon Giant. The guys I worked with in Vancouver, terrific group of people. My God, there were some. Duncan McTavish was there. Stephen Littlebear was there. Roy McClarty, I can't say enough about him. I don't know if any of your fans remember him. Not only a great wrestler, a referee at the end of his career, just a fine gentleman. I mean, he was coaching and helping young guys in the business, classy guy. Gene Kaninsky was exactly what you saw on television was who he was in the dressing room in real life. He was a real outdoorsman. He lived in Blaine, Washington. I got to know him personally outside the ring. He was an outdoorsman, a hunter, a fisherman. He did it all. He had 2 sons that have done well, I believe. I haven't seen them in years and years and years. Kelly, I think, is one of their names. They were in the business for a while. Gene was truly a landmark, if you will, for wrestling in Canada. He was the equivalent to maybe Whipper Billy Watson of his time. Kaninsky, he did interviews. He had a patented interview. He used to thank his wrestling fans throughout Canada, and he thanked the speaker Ron Moyer for interviewing him. He embedded himself into the communities across Canada with his personality and his ring skills. To be honest with you, was he the smoothest guy to work with or one of the best strategists? I would say no, because every night I worked with him, I never quite sure what we were going to do. I'd say to him, "What do you want to do tonight?" He'd say something like, "It's okay, kid. Let's just get out there and get on with it. We got 20 minutes or whatever." And we'd go, and at the end of 20 minutes, I think, okay, I guess that's what we just did. So, but a big name, and he will be remembered for a very long time, particularly in Western Canada.
Someone's asking about King Curtis. He passed through Stampede a few times.
I love the guy. What a fine. King Curtis Ikea was one of the nicest men. Unfortunately, I don't know, I should say, unfortunately, he loved his marijuana. He was always stoned no matter where he went. And he was lovable. I mean, he was like a teddy bear. And working with him was a night off. Like, I sometimes almost wish he would have maybe hit a little harder or squeezed harder or something, because he was just such a pleasure to work with. It was hard to break a sweat with him, but he was the nicest guy. And he traveling in the car, he'd be, I guess, smoking his marijuana or whatever. And I mean, he's gone now, so there's no way they're going to pursue him for that. But at the end, I saw him in Hawaii. He actually had a kind of a surfboard rental business on the beach, and we had a great visit. I believe he had skin cancer at the end of his career, but what a nice guy. If somebody's a big fan of King Curtis Iakia, rightfully so. A terrific guy, very, very, very kind man.
Yes, and I believe he died from hepatitis or something. He was one of the guys that was bleeding all the time, and he probably picked it up in the ring.
Yeah, very possible. Just like Abdullah is another one who sliced a lot. I'm surprised. I don't know if Abby's got hepatitis or not.
Surprised he did. He did have it at one point. I don't know if he got cured or not, but
Okay.
it's amazing he's still alive.
Exactly. Yeah, it's certainly not. He's not on a fitness program, that's for sure.
No, Brandon is wondering if you could elaborate on Donnelly of Jonathan.
Oh, well, I don't know where to start with him. Maybe a lot of people didn't know this, but he had a skin diving business too. This is Donnelly of Jonathan. What a class act. Again, for the fans out there who liked Donnelly of Jonathan and supported him, you had the right pick. This was truly a fine man. I traveled with him a lot on the road. When I was in BC doing shows, we traveled to the U.S. Him and I across the border, or we'd go to Chilliwack or different places. Always a pleasure. Just a really well-spoken guy, a great family man. He loved his wife dearly. Just a class act, and truly a powerful man. Like, he could have been a menace if he wanted to be. Not at all. He was truly a class act. A guy that, if you wanted to admire someone and look up to someone and be mentored by someone, I would say Donnelly of Jonathan would have been a great choice.
Now, you spent a lot of time in Japan here and there. Could you talk about some of the Japanese wrestlers you may have encountered, or Americans that you met in Japan?
Yeah, I could sum the Japanese wrestlers up in one statement: very fit people. When I went over there, I was working with Seiji Sakaguchi in the main events for the championship. Him and I had wrestled in Los Angeles, and he won the belt from me, and then I followed him to Japan to try and win it back. But in some of the towns wherever I toured, I'd worked with different Japanese guys. They were all very fit and the fans in Japan are totally different than North American fans. So the Japanese people, the wrestlers, they were proud of what they did. So I quickly learned that there was no comedy acts. It was all about working solid and being there for them and coordinating and cooperating with them to work. But Japanese wrestlers were different than the catch as catch can style of wrestling that we have in North America. I think some of the Japanese wrestlers came to North America and adapted to our style. I think of Mr. Hedo, I think of Fuji, I think of a lot of guys who were very North American style. But the guys I worked with in Japan who had never come to North America, it was a solid style of wrestling, and you had to be fairly fit. I always found myself pretty exhausted at the end of the match, but they weren't dangerous to work with. I never had any problems with any of them. They were, again, very polite. The language difference makes it very difficult too. You can't call high spots in the ring when you're working with somebody that you don't speak their language, but there's a naturalness about working with them. So they were good. On my tour, I had Earl Maynard, Johnny Valentine. Oh gosh, there were some of the biggest names, and they were great. And I was very privileged to be pretty well main events wherever I went or throughout Japan. So well received. Japanese people treat you with great respect, and it was a great tour. I was very privileged to have that trip.
Did you know Tokyo Joe very well?
Yeah, a little bit. I got to know him. He lost his leg in a car that hit him on the highway going to Lethbridge. I knew him. He was very quiet in the dressing room. I didn't know him well enough to say that I ever worked with him or that, but he was around during my time. Stu really liked him. All the guys liked him. He had a good reputation. Everybody liked him. As Mr. Hedo, he's gone now too, I'm told. He was another guy that was well liked, well respected.
Someone was asking about Bulldog Bob Brown
Oh,
earlier.
yeah. I worked with Bob Brown numerous times. Bob Brown had a personality too that stood out. It's funny, people remember people who have these flamboyant personalities, like Gene Kiniski. Bob Brown was another one, and he had a look about him, so I understood the name Bulldog Brown. He had a little bit of a look that was unique. He was a guy. I worked with him. He was a pleasure to work with. He was pretty outspoken in the dressing room. He was pretty loud and but not boisterous, but just he was his personality was larger than life as well, but he was very popular out on the coast. He did very well. He came to Stampede Wrestling as well, and he was there in Vancouver when I was there. I had two times in Vancouver and British Columbia. I went back and forth. It was great. I loved it. Vancouver Island is my home where I grew up. Vancouver is where I was born. So for me, returning to Vancouver, and the promoters, Sander Kovacs and Gene Kiniski, who was also the promoter, they treated me well. I had a great run with Al Madrill as a tag team partner. We had the belts. Wayne Bridges, who has passed away, terrific English wrestler. Les Thornton, another one. What a great guy. If people only knew how nice these two guys were. If you were fans of Les Thornton's or Wayne Bridges, you pick good guys to be a fan of. Terrific guys.
What about John Foley? Did you know him very well?
Oh, Mr. Whalen. Yeah. Yeah, Foley was truly animated. Foley was really, truly an integral part of Stampede Wrestling. I think he brought as much value to the entertainment business as Ed Whalen brought to the business, as Stu Hart brought to the business, as any of us individually brought to the business. John Foley brought as much. He didn't have to work in the ring. His personality was larger than life, and in the dressing room, he was a hoot. When I joined his army once in disguise and all that, it was my suggestion to join his army, and then I would abandon the army and backstab him and come back as a babyface. That was all my plan. And John Foley was the most open-minded guy to ideas. He would sit there and have a big smile, and I'd say, John, I suggest this, and I thought, well, maybe he won't agree. I love it, Don. That will be lovely. We'll be going out and doing that tonight. I like it very much. Then he would get in front of the microphone and call Ed Whalen out, call the rest of us out. I mean, Foley was truly a lot of fun to work with. I don't know what age he was when he passed, but I was sad when I heard he was gone.
Luther Lindsay, somebody's asking about on here, one of the first black wrestlers in Stampede.
Before my time, I heard great things about him. He was really a tough guy. Apparently, Stu Hart used to tell me numerous stories about Luther Lindsay. Great guy. Yeah, I can't speak to him. I just heard he's truly was a great wrestler.
And what about Mike Shaw? I think he was after you, him and Beef Wellington.
Oh, I worked with Mike Shaw. We had quite a few programs together. Actually, for his size, he was very agile. I would drop kick him and he was back up on his feet just as quick as anybody could be. And he was another guy. I sat with Mike Shaw muckassing and I talked to him about ideas, suggestions. He was very open-minded. He was a pleasure to work with. Another guy, his persona was larger than life. I'm sure he upset a lot of fans, but that was his job. I mean, when you really think about this, to your listeners and viewers, is that the bad guy's job was to make you mad at them. Because I always used to say, the madder the fans are at the bad guy, that makes me look better. That means there are more fans for me now because they're also mad at him. What was difficult sometimes was to work with a villain who the fans loved him. And I will tell you, Archie Goldie had a great following of fans that really admired him and respected him. So some nights when Archie would go in the ring, he was kind of like Donald Trump in his fan base. People loved Archie Goldie, and even though he was a villain, people would cheer for him because they loved the magnitude of who he was. So, it was hard sometimes to be the most favored person in the ring when you had a villain who the fans loved too.
And I don't know if you ever met Ron Bass, but Big Fish is wondering if you ever had any interaction with him.
I never worked with him, but I know him well. We've been at CAC together. Ron is a terrific guy, lives back east. He's on Facebook all the time. He was at CAC. Everybody loves him. He's a terrific guy. I've had a lot of fun joking around with him. We sometimes sort of joke back and forth on Facebook, but I know that he had a pretty good run in the business. We just never crossed paths. But a very likable guy. If you know him, he's a good guy.
Craig wants to know about Big Daddy Ritter, the junkyard dog. I don't know if you were there
Don't
when he
know.
was around.
No, I don't know. We never connected.
He was another one that passed away far too soon. But you retired fairly young. As you talked about in a previous interview, you went into several different employments, including being a prison guard, where you were once shot, and then you ended up opening a successful auto business. And now you're still involved with various things in Cochrane, Alberta, including a bicycle path from Cochrane to Calgary. So, depending on how fast a driver you are, that's about a half-hour drive.
Right.
So it's pretty neat that there's now a bicycle path, because for the fans that don't know, I used to actually live in Cochrane, so I'm very
Right.
familiar with that commute.
I thank you for that because it gives me a segue into talking about one of the great initiatives that I'm working on right now, which is just a great pleasure. Is we, as most Canadians know, the Great Canadian Trail goes from coast to coast. And this is a trail that you can hike, you can bike, and it goes, I mean, there's thousands of kilometers already done. But like links in a chain, there are certain segments of the trail that are not finished. And there's a piece between Calgary and Cochrane, which is approximately 30 some kilometers, and a portion of it's already done. So I'm working with a terrific team of people here, and we're going to finish that trail. So if you came out to Calgary or visit Cochrane, you could get on your bicycle and ride all the way over 30K along the river on the spectacular trail. Now, there's already a connecting trail that goes from Canmore, Alberta to Banff, Alberta. It's called the Legacy Trail. And we would like to eventually hook our trail up to there so people could actually visit, go all the way to Banff on a trail. I mean, it'd be spectacular. These are one of the initiatives I'm working on. And I have a bikeathon coming up shortly, a fundraiser where we're going to do, and we've been invited to be part of Participation this year in June. So I've got a bikeathon coming up. We're excited about that. It's a fundraiser, and we're going to be out there working with the community. We want to finish this trail. I'm working with a tremendous group of people who are so talented and skilled, and we're going to get this trail. It's a $20 million project. We have approximately $4 million in place. We have 2 years to finish the trail, which we think we're going to do. And I would suggest to any of your viewers or listeners, if they're ever in the Calgary area or out here, gosh, all you got to do is look it up. It's quite an achievement that we're going to finish, and I think that a lot of people will benefit from this trail. Retirement is an interesting thing. A lot of us find different places and things to do, and I have been so blessed in finding community engagement has been so fulfilling. Volunteerism, the reward is overwhelming when you work with a great people. We all have the same focus, the same vision to fulfill betterment for others, and it certainly helped me. Maybe it's even got me to almost 77. I'm not too sure, but I'm grateful to have the opportunity to do that and still be here.
Have you heard that apparently they're tearing down the Victoria Pavilion next year?
I don't think so. If you heard that, I'm not sure where, because I saw them renovate that a few years ago for the Stampede
Okay.
grounds. So I think it's there. But they did tear down the other big building, the Corral. It's gone. That was a show that we did Stu Hart's 80th birthday party on in 1995. I was a part of that show. I think you can pull it up if I'm not mistaken. There's a whole 1 hour special on Stu's 80th birthday. It may be on YouTube. But they tore that building down, and they are doing expansions in the grounds there now.
Okay, well, that would be good. It was Spencer Tapley, who you might know as Mark the Shark to Carlo, that told me that about the pavilion.
Yeah, he may be right. There's a guy who's really on top of the business. Like I know him quite well. He lives in Cochrane. He does a great job out here promoting wrestling, and he works at the Venue, which is one of the more popular bars here. He's so involved. Great guy. Does a lot of great work. If he said that, he might know. I didn't know that. I know they renovated the adjoining building, so maybe it is destined to be torn down. It'd be a shame if I hear they are going to, I'm going to go in there and do some videotaping because for me, there's a lot of memories in there. There's a lot of ghosts in that building. You can only imagine how many wrestlers have passed through that pavilion over 50, 60 years. It's quite remarkable.
If they are, I want to promote a last event there.
Yeah.
I,
Well, that'd be
I
great.
actually tried calling them after Spencer told me that, but they haven't got back to me yet.
I'll tell you what, if you do that, because I appreciate what you do for your fans and what you do for us, you in doing these shows, you not only give us an opportunity to speak about our past and bring up great memories, but also you're preserving our history. You're protecting our legacy. So I would say this to you, by one way or another, if you did a show in that building, I'd be happy to come down and referee a ladder match or do whatever I'm still physically able to do. I'd be happy to work with you and help you promote it.
Sounds good. Well, I'll keep you posted because I never got to wrestle there because by the time I was in Stampede Wrestling, they were promoting at the Ogden Legion. But as a
Right.
Stampede Wrestling fan,
Yeah.
I want to cross that off my bucket list. So I'll keep in touch with you on that. Is there anything else you'd like to promote or talk about before we close off here?
Not really. I just like to emphasize the fact that I always take the opportunity to say that the fans play such an integral role, and your viewers, your followers should know that I know I speak for other wrestlers. I know for myself, absolutely, that without you, the fans, there was no professional wrestling. None of us had an opportunity to have a career. I've traveled to cities in the world that I probably never would have seen. I've had experiences that I'm grateful for. So if the fans are not in the arenas, we would have never had a career. So we should never stop and take for granted and think that we are the most important people out there. We're not. We're just a part. We're a team. The fans, us, promoters, the referees, everybody involved in the business make a difference. So in closing, I just want to thank everyone for their support over the years, yours included.
And I'll just, I got to throw in one more question. This isn't somebody that's passed, but it's come up a few times, so I don't want to ignore the fans on it. If you ever met Carlos Colon,
Oh my
when he,
goodness. I know Carlos Colon so well. I will tell you about Carlos Colon. In the early 70s, he came here. He's from Puerto Rico. He and I traveled so many miles together in cars. We used to play cards in the back seat. We traveled from town to town. He was a very good worker, a high flying wrestler. Uh, he went on with a guy named Victor Javico to Puerto Rico. They became promoters. I lost touch with him after that. But he has one distinction that I've always thought was important to clear up is that Dave Rule was a well-known wrestler in Western Canada, and he was the booker for Stu Hart. And one night, Carlos Colon, I'll make this a short story. I could give you the details, but one night, and I've heard different versions, so I think it's important that the true version be told because I was there. We were traveling to Saskatoon, and Carlos and I were in the back seat of the car, and Dave Rule was the driver, and he was smoking a cigar. And the smell of the cigar was overwhelming. And Carlos asked him to put the cigar out, and he didn't put it out. And then Carlos put his window down a bit, and Dave Rule said to him, "Put that window back up." And they got into a difference, and then Dave Rule pulled the car over the side of the road. They both got out. It was a cold night. The ground was very slippery, the asphalt, and Carlos did not punch him. He slapped his face, and his feet, Dave Rule's, went from under him. He went back and hit his head on the ground. He was unconscious for a moment or two. Another car with wrestlers was coming behind us a little ways, a few minutes behind. took Carlos Colon and his friend from New York. Oh, I forgot his name now. If you brought it up, I'd remember. But they jumped in the car. They carried on. I picked up Dave Rule. I put him in the back seat of the car. He was still semi-unconscious. I drove him to Saskatoon. He finally came around, but he was still groggy. I put him in the hotel room. I checked him in, and he stayed all night. Next day, I went to his room to get him. Carlos Colon had nothing to do with him after that. And Dave Rule got a concussion and ended his career. And Dave Rule died, I think, a few years later, but severe concussion. But Carlos Colon, that's a story I wanted to get clear because that was absolutely the truth of what happened. But Carlos Colon was a good worker, nice guy. Him and I spent a lot of time together traveling. I called him a friend, and I don't know, what he's been doing in the last 15, 20 years. I'm not aware of it. But I will tell you his time in Calgary, he was very well liked. He was very successful.
From what I heard recently, his health isn't that great these days, but he is getting up there in age.
Yeah, he's close to my age, I believe. I'll be 77 in June. I would suspect Carlos is right around there too.
Yes, I heard something about dementia, but that wasn't from a direct source.
Yeah, well, it could be true. I mean, we're all suffering for things. I mean, I had a diagnosis 3-4 years ago, which, I'm working with, and I do the best I can. I don't smoke, I don't drink. I try to work out, walk every day, try and stay in shape. But sometimes in life, you inherit things. My father had some genetic factors that I inherited, and I'm dealing with them. But again, I want to emphasize the fact that I'm here, and I'm grateful for that. But you do learn to, as you get older. I call it relinquish and replace. You have to give up the things you can no longer do and replace them with bowling and checkers and things like that.
Well, we're glad you're still around, and we hope you have many, many more years to come. You've had a lot of fans commenting on here. A few people said you were their favorite all-time wrestler. So people still remember you, even though you haven't been in the ring as a full-time wrestler for decades. So thank you very much again. And I'll just let you close this off however you want.
You know what? I think I've said it all. Again, thank you to the fans. Thank you for the kind words. And, if ever an opportunity arises where I can be helpful or instrumental in helping young wrestlers with conversation advice on maybe looking at the future and planning, or if there's anything coming to Calgary or out in this area that you have planned, I'd be more than happy to help work with you to make it successful, because I think the fans always have an appetite for new and exciting things in the world of pro wrestling. So again, thank you.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please help me out and like this video, then click